I, again, thanking Mr. Kenneth Feinberg for taking time out of his schedule. Actually, I'll speak to you in second person instead of third person. Thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule and for being here with us, with our community. It's very meaningful for us and for me, and I just want to thank you. So the topic is putting a price on life, and this topic is quite significant. It's quite significant always, especially just with everything that is, just with the way life is going. It's very, it's a very important topic. Now, when it comes to the value of life, there is a very famous teaching from the Mishnah. The Mishnah talks about, it's actually Tractate Sanhedrin, which is the tractate of Talmud that deals with the courts. And the Talmud is discussing what the courts, what the judges should remark to witnesses before the witnesses testify in a capital case. And the judges are meant to tell the witnesses because, as you may know, the Jewish legal system, the Torah legal system, is not a system where lawyers represent their clients, and it's not an adversarial system where they're pitted against each other, but rather where both sides are presenting evidence to the court directly. So it's an inquisitorial system. So the judges make the following pronouncement to the witnesses in a capital case. And they say, you should know that a capital case is not like a monetary case. In a monetary case, if you lie, if we get it wrong, the money can always be reversed. But in a capital case, if we apply capital punishment based on your testimony, and your testimony is wrong, there's no going back. There's no going back. Mm-hmm. And then the judges say of the very famous phrase that I think we're all familiar with to one extent or another. They say, you should know that this is why Adam was created as one single human being, to teach us that whoever destroys one life, it's as if they've destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves one life, it's like they've saved an entire world. This teaching that one life is of value equivalent to a whole world, this comes from Tractate Sanhedrin 37a. And it's in the context of what the court says to the witnesses before they testify, warning them to make sure that they're not going to testify falsely in a capital case. Because one life innocently taken is like taking out a whole world, and sparing a life. In other words, the message is, if you step back from your testimony and you desist from testifying and you spare this innocent person's life, then you're saving a whole world. So on the one hand, we have this notion that life is of infinite value. On the other hand, we have other teachings in Jewish law. There's an interesting law in Judaism. It's actually a Torah law. It's from the 5 books, from Scripture itself. If somebody pledges a donation to the Holy Temple, the Beit HaMikdash, the ancient temple in Jerusalem, if they would say, I pledge the value of my life to the temple. So how do you ascertain that? If indeed every life is of infinite value, how do you put a dollar figure on that? And there's a system, the Torah sets forth a system, the Talmud discusses. There's a whole tractate called Erchin, which deals with these evaluations. If somebody pledges the value of their life to the temple, the equivalent, right? They're not giving up their life, obviously. The equivalent of the value of their life to the temple, how much is that? Or if they pledge the value of someone else to the temple, what metric system do you use? So on the one hand, I'm just pointing out a duality. On the one hand, we believe that life has infinite value. On the other hand, when it comes to practical scenarios, we have to at the end of the day, we have to assign a value. I don't know that anyone has had as much experience in doing the latter, in actually putting a dollar figure, creating an algorithm, creating a formula for valuing life. I don't think anyone has done this more or better or more effectively than our guest speaker tonight, Mr. Kenneth Feinberg. Mr. Feinberg has been appointed by presidents and companies, trusted by nations to handle their compensation in the face of tragedy. He's been key to resolving many of our nation's challenging and widely known disputes and tragedies. Most famously, Mr. Feinberg is known as the special master of the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. And Mr. Feinberg, remind me, how many billions of dollars were allocated in that? I know you're going to speak about it, but just in this intro.
In that 9/11 fund, we allocated $7.1 billion of public taxpayer money.
Over $7 billion of taxpayer money. Mr. Feinberg has been involved in many, many other scenarios, other cases, and continues to be involved most recently with the Boeing 737 MAX cases and payouts that Boeing is distributing to the family. And who better to speak on the topic of the value of life, both in concept, but also in practice, than Mr. Feinberg. I am so thrilled to have you with us here tonight. I'd like you to speak about your experiences, some of the stories that you've been involved with, and meeting with the families of 9/11 and others. And also, if you can speak to the Jewish values that drive you. But before Mr. Feinberg speaks, I want to share a very quick video. This video was produced by JLI in honor of Mr. Feinberg about just a little over a year ago. It's a very touching video, and I'd like to quickly show it as we get started. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Our world is not short of man-made disasters, perpetrated willfully or through negligence. Consider the U.S. military personnel who were exposed to Agent Orange during the Vietnam War.
Thousands of Vietnam veterans think Agent Orange is now killing them.
9/11.
This was the deadliest terrorist attack in history.
The Virginia Tech shooting.
The deadliest campus shooting in U.S. history.
The BP oil spill.
The president called it the worst environmental disaster America has ever faced.
The Boston Marathon bombing.
Terrorized the city of Boston by setting off dual bombs at Boston's marathon, a historic event.
Each of these episodes produced multiple victims who deserved compensation. On these occasions, someone uniquely qualified was needed to oversee the distribution of the compensation fund. That is no easy mission. Take 9/11, for example.
Today, I'm announcing an important step in the effort to provide both fair and prompt relief to the victims of the September 11th attacks.
Congress rapidly established a compensation fund of some $3.7 billion to be distributed to victims' families. But filtering that vast amount down to the specific sums to be paid to each family required ingenious planning and execution. Each victim was unique. Some had earned handsome paychecks, while others had pulled paltry earnings. Should their families now receive equal compensation? One victim may have been a mother to 7 children. How would that factor into the compensation her family received? If a family was disgruntled with their allocated sum, was there someone to speak to? The U.S. government's choice in this case, and in many other tragedies and travesties that entailed compensating victims, was a brilliant Jewish attorney and adjunct professor of law.
Kenneth R. Feinberg.
Kenneth Feinberg.
Ken Feinberg.
Ken Feinberg is that person that can do that.
Ken worked diligently for 33 months, pro bono, to develop regulations and personally oversee the program.
I will personally see and visit with as many claimants as I can visit with.
Ken Feinberg wears his Jewish heritage with pride. Through his celebrated, patriotic, highly nuanced work, he brings honor to our people. Ken has often insisted that his profound sense of responsibility that propels him to help others, his communitarian ethic, and his overall compassionate approach are inspired by the influence of his Jewish upbringing in Brockton, Massachusetts.
There is some link between my upbringing and where I was brought up and how I was brought up and the values that guide me in my day-to-day work.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, a big welcome and a round of applause to welcome Mr. Kenneth Feinberg.
First of all, I want to thank the rabbi. The rabbi was prescient about 6 months ago.
Can't hear him.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. When you called and asked for me to do this, little did I know at the time that the United States and the world would be focused tonight on Atlanta. They count votes in this amazing election. And as soon as I get off, as soon as we're finished this evening with this presentation, I'll go back to CNN and find out what's really going on in Atlanta and Fulton County and the rest of the voting in this amazing time that we live in now with the pandemic and a national election. But the rabbi, in his infinite wisdom, did get a hold of me and asked if I would participate in this, what we thought would be maybe face-to-face, but turned out a Zoom conversation. Now let me, in terms of the first subject, valuing lives, let me put a fair amount of cold water on the rabbi's introduction concerning complexity and Solomonic skill. Valuing lives in the United States and deciding what is a life worth is not rocket science. There are people participating in this program tonight that could do exactly what I do. Every day in Atlanta, in every court in Georgia, in every court throughout the United States, judges and juries do that every day. They value lives. It's part of our American legal system. If somebody goes outside of the city hall in Atlanta and gets hit by an automobile, you choose your lawyer, I'll choose my lawyer, judge and jury, decision, based on formulas for valuing compensation that have been time honored in this country, in every state, in every city, town, village. It is not rocket science. One, what would the person who died, what would the person have earned over a work life but for the tragedy? Stockbrokers, bankers, lawyers, doctors, accountants, they earn a lot more than the waiter, the busboy, the unemployed immigrant, the cop, the fireman, the soldier. Their economic loss is a calculation. It's math. It's not the Talmud. It's give me a calculator. That's what you need. What would the victim have earned? Less taxes, less cost of overhead. We live in a beautiful house, blah, blah. Second, add to that number pain and suffering, emotional distress, a jury determination equals an award paid by the tortfeasor, the driver, or her insurance company, or the city of Atlanta if you fell on a crevice because they didn't fix the sidewalk. It's a calculation valuing not what a life is worth, but what a life will receive from a jury. Now, what is not factored in to that cold calculation? Compassion, loyalty, dignity, love, sensitivity to one's family. For those elements, those variables, the victim or her family, go talk to the rabbi about that. Read the Talmud, get some blessing and some solace from Jewish books of learning. But don't ask Ken Feinberg. to weigh in on existential elements like dignity, compassion for one's fellow human being. That should be worth something. No, that's not part of my job. My job in the 9/11 fund, the BP oil spill fund, the Boston massacre, the Patriot bombings, my job is to replace judge and jury and do it myself, under great stress, I might add. The real problem in valuing lives in programs that the rabbi mentions that I was involved in, the real problem every time is emotion. Emotion. Because you are dealing with individuals either physically injured or dead, but their loved ones, the family, come to see me. Everybody has an opportunity, if they want, voluntary. I will meet privately with each family who wants to see me. The stories I hear when I sit in confidence with grieving people are debilitating. They're debilitating. You don't sleep afterwards. You never forget. Because no matter how you brace yourself and expect to be prepared for what you're going to hear, when families come to see you, brace yourself. Very, very rarely does anybody come to see me about a lost loved one and complain about money. They don't complain to me about money. The programs I administer are very, very generous financially. No. When they come to see me privately, they have 2 points on their mind that they want to make with me. First, they want to vent about life's unfairness. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my daughter at the World Trade Center. She had just graduated law school. It was her first day at her new firm in September. She died. There is no God, Mr. Feinberg. No God would allow my little daughter, 18 years old, 19 years old, to die in the World Trade Center. Don't talk to me about religion. The government was at fault. You're here representing the United States. You make sure they understand. How dare anybody talk to me about religion after 9/11? People want to vent in their anger, flailing away at the one person who's there to put a dollar value on what will be compensated. It is horrifying. In the 9/11 fund, I conducted 950 private hearings, and each story was different. So people come to vent, just vent about the curveballs thrown at their family and at themselves. Or they come for a different reason every time. They come to validate the memory of a lost loved one. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my wife at the World Trade Center. We were married for 25 years. And now that I'm here with you, Mr. Feinberg, I hope you don't mind, but I want to show you a video of our wedding 25 years ago. I want you to see what those terrorists, those murderers did to my wife. Watch. And there he shows a video of the marriage 25 years ago. And he comments, see how beautiful she looked? We met and we fell in love. And I just want you to know, Mr. Feinberg, it's not about the money. I want you to see my loved one. Tears, Kleenex, handkerchiefs, people crying. Now, if you think that calculating a check is the hard part of what I do. No. It's the emotion that's associated with the whole activity. After the Boston Marathon bombing, I get a call, Mr. Feinberg. I was at the marathon on Patriots Day in Boston, and the bomb went off, and I lost my left leg at the hip. Now, I'm in rehab at Mass General, so I can't come to see you. I said, that's all right, Mr. Jones, I'll come to see you. So I got in a taxi, I went over to the hospital, and I went up to his hospital room. I walk in, there he is lying in bed with a stump where his left leg was, and on his lap is his 9-year-old son, and around his bed, his wife, his mother, and his brother. And I said to him, Mr. Jones, this is terrible what's happened to you. Awful. All I can tell you is that I'm here to tell you that the Boston Marathon Fund will give you tax-free, $1,250,000. He looks at me. You're going to give me $1,250,000? I got a better idea, Mr. Feinberg. You keep the money. Give me my leg back. How's that? Give me my leg back. I don't want the money. I want my leg back. Mr. Jones, I wish I had that power. I can't rectify this. All I can do is give you some degree of financial security. Thanks a lot. Big deal. I left. What can you say? What can you say, you see? But that's the hard part of the problem of when I take on one of these assignments. One more. 9/11, a lady comes to see me, 24 years old, sobbing. I thought she was gonna collapse in the hearing room. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband at the World Trade Center. He was a fireman. And he left me with our 2 children, 6 and 4. Now, I see that you're going to give me $2.3 million tax-free. I want it in 30 days. This is Jones, 30 days. This is public taxpayer money. The US Treasury has to cut the check. It may be 60 days, maybe 90. I hope not, but no, 30 days. I said to her, Mrs. Jones, why do you need the money in 30 days? Why? I'll tell you why, Mr. Feinberg. I have terminal cancer. I have 10 weeks to live. My husband was going to survive me and take care of our 2 children. Now they're going to be orphans. I have got to get this money while I still have my faculties. I've got to get a trust set up. I've got to get a guardian. I'm not going to be around much longer, and I don't have much time. Well, we raced down to the Treasury with my staff. We went room to room. We got the check cut. We got her the money. 8 weeks later, she died. Now, it is that aspect of my work, the debilitating stress when your judge, jury, rabbi, priest, whatever, shaman, I mean, that's why every time I pick up a newspaper and there's some tragedy, I go, whoa, not again. And so when you value lives, I've learned a few lessons besides the mechanics of calculation. 1, empathy. Empathy. People in grief come to see you, and you have to try to be as empathetic as you can. You're a sounding board for people, you see. Second, the less you say, the better. Because if you open your mouth in an attempt to be sensitive, compassionate, empathetic, watch out. You're dealing with very angry, vulnerable people, and you better be. I make mistakes. You can't help but make mistakes with people. An 80-year-old man came to me after 9/11 and he said, Mr. Feinberg, I lost my son at the Pentagon when the plane hit. He escaped. He escaped from the Pentagon. He was safe, but he thought his sister was trapped. She also worked at the Pentagon. So he went back into the Pentagon to look for her. She had already escaped through a side door. He died looking for her. Mr. Feinberg, a father should never bury a son. My life is over. I don't care how much money you give me. Without my son, my life is over. I'm just going through the motions. Well, I looked at this old man and I said to him, I said, Mr. Jones, this is a terrible story. This is awful. I know how you feel. Well, this old man looks at me. He says, Mr. Feinberg, I want to tell you something. You got a tough job. I don't envy what you have to do. Don't ever tell somebody like me that you know how I feel. You have no idea. I know you didn't mean harm by saying it, but I'm giving you some constructive advice. Don't tell people like me that you know how I feel. You have no idea. Well, I'll never do that again, but you make mistakes and you better be careful. Now, two other points. I think the 9/11 fund, the BP oil spill fund, the Boston Marathon, I mean, those are well-intentioned and they're wonderful compensation plans, and they bring out the best in the American character, you see, to help our fellow citizens. Be careful what you wish for with these funds. Especially be careful about setting up a fund and using public taxpayer money to pay people. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my son in Oklahoma City when a domestic terrorist blew up the Murrah building. Why aren't I eligible for compensation? Mr. Feinberg, I don't get it. My daughter died in the basement of the World Trade Center in the original 1993 attacks committed by the very same type of people. Where's my check? And it's not just terrorism, you see. Dear Mr. Feinberg, I don't get it. Last year, my wife saved 3 little girls from drowning in the Mississippi River, and then she drowned a heroine. Where's my check? Better be careful about setting up special compensation programs only for a select few. Everybody else, fend for yourself, judge, jury, trials, lawyers. But for you people and you people only, special compensation, gift from the American people, gift from the taxpayer. I mean, the public policy implications of providing special compensation lead to all sorts of philosophic and practical issues about different treatment of tragedy for different people. Very problematic, thorny. Now, how have my Jewish values and my Jewish background, in fact, frankly, my secular background, what prepares you to do something like this in a career? Well, nothing really prepares you, believe me. You go to law school and you grow up and you go to the synagogue and you think you're going to be on a track towards a certain professional goal. And then life has a way of changing the best laid plans. I tell my law students all the time, you may think you know what you're going to do for a professional career. You have no idea. Life has a way of altering the best laid plans. Roads diverge, you make different decisions. But I was very, very fortunate. First, I grew up in a very optimistic time with a very loyal and dedicated Jewish family and Jewish community in Brockton, Massachusetts. And it was a time in the late 1950s and early 1960s when optimism in this country reigned. It was the prevailing aspirational hope of a very close-knit Jewish community that we would help each other. There were 3 different synagogues, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. The Jewish community, indeed the secular community of Brockton, rallied around each other. The communitarian ethic was very strong, not like today. And I grew up with a very effective combination of secular and religious value. Religious, I'll tell you, I was a practicing what we call secular Jew, synagogue on the high holidays, Temple Beth Emunah in Brockton, alongside Temple Israel and Temple Agudah Sachem, and religious school and holidays, the high holidays, Pesach as well. Enough Jewish learning that you understood basic Jewish values. But what I really learned growing up and after is the value of Jewish ritual surrounding death, Shiva, the community-wide assistance brought to the grieving. No one grieves alone, guarding the body before burial, community participation at the burial site. I learned from my Jewish friends and families how important it is that no one grieve alone. And I learned that in these 9/11 and all of these other hearings that I conduct, how important the process is. The process to give people the opportunity, if they want, to be heard and to recognize a forum, a venue where I represent the community and I'm here to listen and I'm here to pay respect and I'm here to provide some assistance. And all of these programs, despite the financial generosity of the programs, they are successful primarily because of the process, not the money. And that process is something that I sort of put together based in large part on what I learned about how Judaism and Jewish priorities are triggered during times not of happiness, but tragedy and sorrow. Very, very valuable to me. The other blessing I had in 1960, 61, 62, I lived in an area of the country where one of our own, John F. Kennedy, was president of the United States. And as a teenager, I will never forget President Kennedy when he said to all Americans, 1, government is not a dirty word. 2, serving the public interest is a noble undertaking. And 3, very important, every single individual can make a difference. Now, I must say, those principles had a lasting impact on my upbringing and on my professional aspirations. And when you take those secular principles and meld them together with what I learned about Judaism and value and process, for me, a very potent recipe and mixture that has guided me ever since. And it is particularly difficult for me today to witness how much of what I learned growing up as an aspirational young man, has largely been ignored today. Most of those lessons right now are on hold. I find it's difficult to watch. There's too much today, to me, I think, not enough we, and too much me. And I think that's been to the detriment of the country and to our common community. But that's sort of the background. That's what I've done. I'm always reserved when someone says, gee, Ken, we really want you to come and explain to our group how you value lives. Believe me, that's not the hard part. That really isn't the hard part. The hard part is dealing with real people who have suffered so through no fault of their own, and how you reach out to them and the decisions you make, and you try and do the right thing. One of the problems you find about valuing lives, that is deciding how much compensation should go to you or your next door neighbor. Very few people, very few, come and argue with me about the dollars I'm giving them in absolute terms. No, very rare that someone says, you're giving me 2 million, I ought to get 3 million. You don't hear much of that at all. What you do hear, you got to remember, everybody counts other people's money. Mr. Feinberg, you're giving me 2 million, but you're giving my next door neighbor 3 million. What do you have against my dead husband? You never even met him. And yet you're tarnishing his reputation by giving me $1 million less than my next door neighbor. What do you have against my husband? You never even met my husband. Well, Mrs. Jones, look, I'm not tarnishing. I never met your husband. I'm giving your next door neighbor, first of all, don't assume you know what your next door neighbor is actually getting, but put that aside. I'm giving your next door neighbor an extra $1 million because, he earned more than your husband. You know how far that gets me? 0. That reasonable explanation of distinction gets you nowhere with people in grief. Nowhere. And so you do the best you can. And you're criticized, you're accused. And here's the last point, and then questions. People say all the time to me, Mr. Feinberg, you know what's really good? You really set up a program that was fair and just. I look at it, there's nothing fair or just about these programs. These programs have very little to do with fairness. Here's $5 million, but you'll never see your daughter again. That's not fair. And that's not just. These programs, I think, have evolved. I think these programs are grounded in mercy, not justice. Go to the Jewish books of learning and study mercy. a life preserver to people, but don't talk about fair or just when you're giving somebody money in return for either death of a loved one or debilitating injuries which are life altering. That is not justice, as I understand it. So there we are. And I assume that when we end this program, the difference in the presidential election will now be 2,000 votes instead of 3,000 votes. And a few days ago, it was 300,000 votes. And unless the rabbi has a better plan, there's my summary, and I'm ready for whatever he wants to do next.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Feinberg, for sharing that. And I have a lot of reflections myself, but I do want to give the opportunity for those that are joining us live to be able to ask questions as well. Before we get started with the Q&A section, and I'm going to get started because I have a question that I want to ask myself, I want to say a very special thanks to sponsor of tonight's event, Dr. Joy Maxey. Thank you for helping sponsor tonight's event. And for helping bring Mr. Feinberg to the community and set this up for everybody. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you. I have Mr. Feinberg, I have a question related to what you mentioned. So it's interesting, like we titled this event Putting a Price on Life, but based on what you just said, it's less about putting a price on life because it's not about, as I understood your final point, it's not about valuing life. It's extending chesed, it's extending a kindness, it's extending generosity. This is not the value of your loved one. This is some help moving forward. Is that an accurate thing to say?
That is very accurate.
Okay. And one more question, and then I'm gonna open it up to others. When it came to 9/11 and the compensation program, was it your initiative to personally meet with the families, with everyone who wanted, or was that something that was part of an existing framework, or did you create that?
We created that because I knew that people in grief better have some opportunity to vent about their grief. An outlet.
Wow.
Wasn't required. This was supposed to be an assembly line calculation made by Feinberg as judge and jury. But I decided, if you don't give people an opportunity to let off steam about life's unfairness, this program won't work. So it was a decision we made, my staff and I, to allow voluntarily. You didn't have to come and see me. Don't forget, there are many, many people in this world that grieve in private. They don't want to come and see me. They'll send in an application, they'll fill it out and send me a check. I don't want you to know. I don't want to come and see you. I am in grief. I will grieve in private. That's entirely up to them. And to this day, there are people who lost loved ones on 9/11. Every 9/11 holiday, anniversary, a week before, they get on a boat and they travel somewhere and they don't want to know about 9/11 and they come back a week later and get on with their lives. They grieve in private. They need no public spectacle or public program, not spectacle. Even if my hearings are in private, there are some people, fine, I don't have to go see Feinberg. I will grieve alone. Half the people wanted to see me. Half the people who were eligible just sent in their applications and didn't want to see me.
Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so now at this point, the floor is open. If you wish to ask a question, feel free to unmute and ask away.
Mr. Feinberg, my name is Jeff Kirsch. Thank you very much for sharing with us. My question has to do with something you alluded to earlier, which is there are only certain situations in which these funds are set up. And I'm wondering if you're at all involved in decision-making or being consulted in when a fund is set up. I'm quite mindful that we are in the midst of a pandemic that is taking many thousands of lives, many more, sadly, than 9/11 or other great tragedies. But I have yet to hear any thought that we would set aside some notion of compensation or mercy, as you put it, to them. Do you become involved in that kind of decision making? And how do you feel about it when somebody says to you, we have this money for this topic, but not this other one?
First of all, I have nothing to do whatsoever with whether or not a fund should be established. Presidents come to me, or the Congress, or a governor, or a mayor, or a company. They say, we are going to set up a fund. Will you administer the fund, design it? Here's the amount of money, design it and administer it. Okay, all right. So I am totally removed from the decision made by elected officials or judges or whoever to set up a fund. Now, my view about these funds is, look, if the American people after 9/11, acting through their elected representatives, want to set up a fund, or after the Boston Marathon, if the mayor of Boston stands up and says, please donate money, we want a fund, or the mayor of Orlando after the Pulse nightclub shooting says, we want a fund, that's America. I mean, I raise these political problems about actually philosophic. Why a fund here for $7 billion and a fund here for 60 million and a fund here for 5 million and no fund here? That's America. I mean, if there's a groundswell of political support for a fund, the American people have spoken. In Boston Marathon, in 60 days, the mayor of Boston and the governor, Deval Patrick, Mayor Menino, they raised through private solicitation $62 million. I never heard of such a thing. Mm-hmm. 62 million from 100,000 people around the country from Atlanta. Oh my God, they saw on MSNBC, the Boston Marathon, they write out a check and they send the money into one fund. I mean, I'll tell you one thing you learn, Jeff. Jeff, isn't it?
It is.
Jeff. Never underestimate the charitable impulse of the American people. It is astounding to me. In a time of tragedy, there's no red state, blue state, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. The American people, it's an amazing thing. Oh, we saw it on television. Sandy Hook, those 25 first graders that were killed. They sent in money from Atlanta, from Texas, from California. So if the American people want to set up a fund, set up a fund. But there are certain inequities in it, I must say. But that's the decision made by people.
Thank you very much.
Rabbi?
Yeah, Dr. Maxey, go ahead.
My question is, can you share a little bit more about the formula? And I get what you were saying is in law and tort in particular, there are certain formulas for, what did the decedent earn? What did they do? How much pain and suffering? How much emotional distress? And then you made the point about loyalty, dignity, love, compassion, that the fact that this person was a mother of 7, etc. Was that somehow at the end of the day factored into the 9/11 compensation, or has it been factored in, say, in the BP disaster or in other of these programs you have been affiliated with? And if so, how do you place a monetary value? How do you factor in things like loyalty, dignity, love, compassion?
One, you don't factor in loyalty, dignity, love, and compassion. It's
so
irrelevant.
You did it in 9/11?
In any program of mine, irrelevant. Now,
Okay.
you raise a very good question, however. If somebody in 9/11 died at the World Trade Center or on the airplanes or at the Pentagon and left 5 dependents and a wife, we have a formula, just like judges and juries in Atlanta. We'll pay for the death of the victim, and we will also provide an additional $250,000 to the wife and each dependent. So a wife, let's say the economic loss suffered by the death of the victim is $2 million, but the wife is $250,000. 4 other children are $250,000 each. That's another $1 million in total on top of the $2 million. Plus, we'll include in that $250,000 for the wife and the kids a recognition that it's also emotional distress and pain and suffering, equals a $3 million check to the surviving spouse to take care of herself and the 4 children. That's how it works. And if somebody wants to talk about liberty, love or dignity, go see the rabbi. I can't. How am I going to place a value on love and dignity? There'll be a riot if I say that person, there was more love and more dignity than that person. Courage is another thing. Someone would come to me and say, you know, my husband was a fireman and he died courageously. And isn't courage worth another $500,000? No, I'm not. Everybody died with courage. I don't want to hear about that. It'll promote the very divisiveness I'm trying to avoid.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, Irena, go ahead.
hi, Mr. Feinberg. So I wanted to know, when people go to see you, they just see you, or it's you and your staff?
Just me. If they want to see somebody else, I'll bring in, but I mean, they really want to talk to me in confidence. And they want a transcript made. We have a stenographer.
Okay.
Because many people want to talk about a lost loved one. They want to get the transcript and keep it, put it in a safe deposit box for their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren. So we have a stenographer there to take down what the person says.
Almost sounds like it's preserving like a record, like an official public record of.
It's not an official public record. It's
an official, private. But official.
That's right. People want some, not all. Mr. Feinberg, when that transcript, when it's transcribed, would you please send me a copy, because I want to keep it and be able to show my grandchildren 50 years from now all about their father, their grandfather, or whatever, and put it in the safe deposit box.
Thank you. Richard, go ahead.
Hey, Mr. Feinberg, a very personal question for you, if you care to answer it. My name is Richard Crone. If you care to answer it, how do you handle your grief? How do you handle your emotions with this? You go to someone, you deal with yourself. How do you vent from all of this? How do you handle this trauma, which is actually becomes in an indirect way your trauma?
It is a very good question. I'm asked that frequently, and you don't handle it very well. It is debilitating. You don't sleep. There are some outlets. First, you better have a very loving family that every day reinforces your resolve. Because if you've got a harping relative or a kid who's going to complain, you're in big trouble. And I'm fortunate in that my wife, and at the time I had 3 children, but they were all out of the house. So it was really my wife, although my kids were very supportive. Secondly, I found that classical music at night was a tremendous help to me. I must have gone to the opera 3 nights a week. You sleep for one thing. You can fall asleep in the middle of the opera. No one's going to bother you. Sometimes the only time you sleep. But I found that classic Beethoven, Mozart, opera the height of civilization. During the day, you are in the sewer when it comes to civilization. The worst of it. At night, you sit back and you try and get some help from Beethoven. And so that helped. Then I must say, this is an interesting point directed at the rabbi more than anybody. I decided I want to get some answers about how to value lives. So I went to the head rabbi at the Union Theological Seminary in New York City. I said to the rabbi, show me in Jewish books of learning how I should go about doing this horrible task. And the rabbi, he was great. He said, look, Feinberg, I want to tell you something. This idea that Jewish books of learning can give you answers to every question, ancient Jewish books of learning never contemplated planes crashing into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And when you value lives, you're doing it fine. Stick to secular considerations. You're not going to get a magic bullet or a silver bullet in Jewish books of learning. Now, you may get some comfort from Jewish books of learning. And he gave me some Talmudic excerpts. But he said, in terms of a compensation formula in Jewish books, forget it. You're not going to, you know, these parables, you guys have seen them. Yeah, the horse trader had 2 bags of wheat, and he had to give 1 wheat to the poor guy in the village and 1 get to the mayor. And what books and wheat? It doesn't help me very much. But it was helpful that I at least went to the rabbi and spoke to him. And my local rabbi was quite supportive. Just
fantastic. Good. Donna, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for joining us, Mr. Feinberg. So when the people that come to see you, do you get the question, how can I spend this money when I know, it's because my loved one passed away? How can I actually use that money? And then another question I have, please, is, of course, it's understood, someone that has children or someone that's injured, of course, they need the money, to go on with their life. But what about those people, such as the elderly gentleman with his adult child? What do they do with the money, and how can they, how are they reconciling that they now have this money?
not on my watch. I've got enough problems. I in no way attempt to direct the money or restrict it or order that it be spent a certain way. Once I give the money to an eligible victim, what they do with that money is their business. Now, this is interesting. In 9/11, I offered every family that received compensation free financial counseling. I had Goldman Sachs and I had JP Morgan. I had all these institutions ready to provide free investment counseling, 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, 6 million in some cases. And I said to 2,800 families that lost a loved one, I'm going to give you this money, and if you want, I will provide for you, nothing to do with me, but I'll give you free financial help so you'll know what to do with the money, how to protect it. Of the 2,800 people where I offered that service, 85 took it. Everybody else, thank you very much, but we know what we're going to do with it. We don't need any help, and there's a Bolivian gold mine or whatever it is. But not on my watch. I get the money, I calculate it, I present it, or send it, that's it. I'm done. What you do with it is your business. And frankly, I was pleased that nobody, after I gave them the money, I never heard from them again. There were no reunions or let's get together and a year later or, reminisce. And you move on as best you can. This is a horrible chapter. There's no reunions. There's no coming back to me. One family for about 15 years on the anniversary sent me flowers. And then that stopped. I never responded. I never thanked them or anything. I didn't think it was appropriate. But no, getting the money up and out is the end of my role, I think.
I was wondering about the emotional trauma for the people getting the money, the guilt, the possible guilt.
Maybe. I didn't hear much guilt. I didn't hear families that blame themselves in any way. And I think most families saw the money as a financial lifeline. And that was it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, go ahead. Hold on. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Mr. Feinberg, question, you're brought in and on one side of you is a fund. On the other side of you are people who've been hurt or are dead. How do you figure out what is worth what?
Well, as I said, sorry?
You have a fund on one side and you have hurt on the other. Legs gone, people gone, etc. How do you figure out how much to give out for a given loss?
If it's a death, I've already explained. There's a rattle coming here. Hear me?
There's a little bit of a background noise.
Is this any better?
No, I know. I think you're.
There, how's that?
Oh, but I can answer your question and then the death claim I've already explained. I try and calculate what a person would have earned over a work life and add some pain and suffering. If it's a physical injury, the person survived but lost a leg or had a severed arm or a broken back, or on the 9/11 fund, mostly burns, third-degree burns, escaping from the World Trade Center or the Pentagon. There, again, you try and calculate what that physical injury, how that will adversely impact their employment, and come up with a number. Pain and suffering is a big factor in there, because if it's a burn or a severed limb, and there's rehab and burn treatment, we were very, very generous in terms of pain and suffering.
Thank you.
Okay, on again.
Okay, I think we are right at the time. Mr. Feinberg, I want to thank you once again for generously sharing your time with us and your experiences and your insight. And I think what came through, at least for me, is the essence of the Jewish perspective on life and death and grieving, and how you try to integrate that into a program that could have been completely cut and dry, just sending checks off and moving the money forward to where it needed to go. The fact that you organized it in a way that really took people into consideration and allowed them that opportunity, I think is a number one, it's a bracha, it's a blessing for those families. And it's a testament to the type of person that you are. So I wanted to thank you for sharing your experiences and for inspiring us all in our own way this evening. May God bless you. May Hashem bless you with continued health and the ability to continue to do so much good for others, especially people that are in an unfortunate situation. And may we all experience a time when the tragedies are no longer, and we're living in a more peaceful world where, as you mentioned, the values maybe of yesteryear, where we are looking out for each other and looking to benefit each other. Let us say, Amen. Again, thank you, Mr. Feinberg. Thank you all for joining. I want to wish you a Laila Tov, good evening, and lots of blessings. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, Rabbi. Thank you for bringing Mr. Feinberg to us, and thank
you.
Take care. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.